Hi everybody. Today we will be painting a wintry Northern Lights landscape painting. So first I'll go through all of the paint that we'll be using. On the top of my plate here I have titanium white. Then the next one I have is deep green permanent, phthalo blue, Mars black, and cadmium yellow medium. If you don't have those colors exactly, you can still, of course, do this painting. So don't worry if you don't have the exact colors, it'll still turn out. I'm using a 12 by 16 stretched canvas. And I'll go over my brushes now. Again, the brushes, really you want a big flat one and a small flat one. I've got an assortment here. I may not use them all, but I have a 1 inch flat, a 3/4 inch flat, a 1/2 inch flat, and this is a 3/8 inch angle brush. I'll probably use this one for my trees. So just a few assortment of flat brushes will do you. You're gonna want some water, a tub of water or a jar, and you'll want some paper towel. So the first thing I'm gonna do is paint my background. And for that, I'm going to use my large flat brush. I'm gonna wet it in my water. And we're going to mix kind of a turquoise green color. So for that, I'm gonna pull a little of my green, and you can see my brush is wet, so it's thinning out my paint slightly. So a little bit of green, and I'm gonna take a little bit of blue and pull in with that. And this will create our turquoise color. I'm also gonna take a little hint of white and mix in with that. First thing I'm gonna do is kind of divide my canvas in, I'm gonna come up about 1/3 of the way. And again, this doesn't have to be exactly, so half would be about there. So I'm gonna say 1/3 is probably about right here. So I'm just gonna draw a line with the edge of my brush around that area. And this is where my horizon will be. So below this will be my frozen pond, and above it will be my sky. So I'm gonna take my flat brush and I'm gonna start smoothing on my paint. I'm just gonna check my lighting and make sure it's not too, I'm gonna put it about there. Okay. That should be okay. So we're gonna use this green mixture, this kind of turquoise mixture, to start to fill in our sky. And as I move up my canvas, I want it to get progressively darker. So for that, I'm gonna pull a little more green and blue, but no white this time. So it's still my turquoise, but it's a little darker. A little more green and blue. So we've got about half of our sky filled in there now. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm not gonna rinse my brush. So it still has green and blue on it. I'm gonna take a little black on the corner of my brush. So green and blue, little black on the corner, and I'm gonna start smoothing on some black, and I'm really kind of running my brush over where the black has started. I don't want to have a line separating my black and my turquoise. I want them to gradually transition from turquoise to black. So there should not be a stripe or a hard line here, guys. That's kind of one of the things I see happening a lot with beginners that are trying to paint a sky that has more than one color. It tends to start to look like a flag or a stripe. So we're going to make sure we've blended together our sky so that there's no line where our turquoise stops and our black begins. So now I'm up to like I'm up to probably the top 1/4 or less of my canvas. So for that, I'm just picking up straight black and you finish off right to the top with straight black. We haven't rinsed our brush at all. And there's our sky. Now for the bottom, we're going to paint just black. My brush has green and blue still in it, and also black. I'm not gonna rinse it. I'm just gonna pick up my straight black, maybe pick a little water up. So I'm just dipping my brush in my water and coming to my black just to help it thin out a little bit. So if you're using paint straight from the tube, you're gonna have a difficult time getting that to cover. It needs to be thinned a little bit with water. And we'll do the bottom of our canvas solid black. One even, smooth coat of solid black. And there we go. I'm gonna throw my brush in my water and leave it there for a minute, and now I'm gonna dry my canvas. So if you want, you could take a little break. For me, for purposes of our video, I'm gonna use a hair dryer. So bear with me. Alrighty. So once your background is dry, the next thing we're going to layer on is our Northern Lights. So for this one, I'm going to find my brush. If you have a brush that's a little bit old and worn, that may do the best job for you. So I have a 1/2 inch flat brush that's a little, the bristles are frayed out a little bit and it's a little bit worn and old. So this is going to do a better job. So what I'm gonna do, my brush is slightly damp, not too damp. And this kind of turquoise mixture that we had from our background, I'm just gonna pull a little white in. And I'm trying to go for just a lighter turquoise mixture. We'll test a few brush strokes, and then if we have to adjust any, we will. So our Northern Lights are gonna come sort of in a V shape on our canvas. I'm gonna start from the far left and work my way across. I do need to kind of turn my canvas a little bit for this, so. Brush is not wet, it's a fairly dry brush, and we're just going to lightly find our V shape. And I'll put this a little closer to the camera so you can see here, we're not putting a lot of paint and you can see through it a little bit. So just remember, when you're doing your Northern Lights, you don't want a big brush full of paint. You want a fairly dry brush with just a little bit of paint on, and you're gonna brush up and down. And you can see where I had a little excess paint there. So just be careful of that because it really shows up if you go too heavy too soon. You may need to keep mixing a little bit like I'm doing at a time. But again, don't worry too much about getting the same color again. If you have to keep mixing a little, it can be all different. I'm gonna say the bottom of mine will be about right there. And I'll come right up to that top right corner. I just wet the corner of my brush. I needed a little hint of water. I need to keep adjusting this light. Okay, let's make a little bit lighter again. So a little more white with it this time. Let's start again, and this time it's almost like we're highlighting. So we're just adding a little extra lightness. Next, what I'm gonna do, a little more light here. Then we're gonna start adding a little hint of yellow. So I'm not gonna rinse my brush. I'm just giving a little tiny bit of water to it. And I'm gonna take a little yellow and just kind of mix right on top of this light turquoise greeny color. So it kind of makes this sort of a lime green. and we'll add a little hint of that. And every now and then, it's nice to just take a step back and look at it and see if you want to add a little more lightness or darkness anywhere. I'm going to pick up another little hint of white, and I'm going to come back and just go in with that little hint of white. And I think I'm going to add a little more darker teal. Let's take a little more green and blue, a little bit of white, keeping it fairly dark. And I'm going to add a little bit of that to my kind of upper left. There's really no right or wrong way to do it, but keeping this kind of V shape helps it look like the Northern Lights, gives it that kind of look. There. So I think we're good for our Northern Lights. The next thing we're going to do, and these dry pretty fast, the next thing we're going to do is our trees. We're going to do a line of trees. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give it a little blast with my hairdryer. I'm going to take that small angle brush. This is a 3/8 inch angle brush, and put some black paint on it. And the first thing I'm going to do is come along my horizon line and just sort of flick up to give almost a grassy look. And don't worry if you overlap down onto this black. It's all going to get covered after with our kind of frosty, snowy edging to our pond. So I'm turning my brush different ways. Sometimes it's the flat part, other times it's the sharper edge. Just to give a variance to the look and the brush strokes. If you do every stroke the same way, the whole way across, it's gonna look too deliberate, I'll call it. So turn your brush different ways, make different marks, little short brush strokes to give a grassy look. Alrighty. I'm gonna put a little more black paint out onto my paint plate. And now we're gonna do our trees. And the type of trees I do for this one are kind of those northern sort of bare trees with not a whole lot of branches. They're not real thick and fluffy trees, so let's try this. Just check my camera. Perfect. Alrighty, let's start from the left and work our way to the right. But if you are right-handed, you're going to start from the right and work to your left. So I'm using my small 3/8 inch angle brush, and I'm going to make a skinny line. It might got a little wiggle in it, which that happens with trees sometimes. Then I'm just going to take the tip of my brush and just start dabbing back and forth, picturing a bare, sparse tree with not many branches. And that's about it. That will be tree number 1. And we're going to continue right across with a whole row of trees. And I like to vary my sizes. Some of them up across your Northern Lights sky, and some can be down lower. Practice wiggling your brush different ways. Let's do a little small one. Wiggle your brush different ways, and it'll give your trees that look, that kind of not symmetrical. You don't want to dab every tree branch on the exact same. If you do, it's not going to look realistic. Every now and then, skip a little extra big space. Let's do one kind of close. And some can be a little thicker trees if you want. They don't all have to be super, super sparse. Just remember to vary your brush strokes, dab in different directions, move the brush in your hand. I kind of like the little wiggle to the trees. If you've never lived somewhere northern, you're probably not familiar with the type of tree I'm trying to portray. But if you have, well, you can always Google them, I guess. But if you have lived somewhere in the northern hemisphere like we are here, you'll be quite familiar with these kind of trees. That one might have a little bushy top. There, and that's our line of trees. The next thing we're gonna do, so I'm just gonna rinse that and just kind of leave it. I'm gonna go back to that brush we used to do our Northern Lights. So I've just rinsed it and patted it dry. Next thing we're gonna do again is a little bit of that turquoise. So it's our green and our blue mixed together with some white. You can have it more on the green side or more on the blue side, whatever you want. I'm just gonna dab a little in my paper towel to take some of the excess off. And then I'm just gonna come to the center of my, what I'm imagining is a frozen pond. And I'm not pressing real hard, and I'm sort of letting it slide off the edge, sort of. I'm not pressing hard the whole way. I have a lighter pressure when I flick it out on this each side. And you'll notice I didn't come out too far, so my edges are still pretty black. I'm gonna rinse that brush again, and we're going to make a little kind of snowy edge around our pond. So for that, we're still staying with the same colors we've been using, but this time it's mostly white. So a wet brush, thin out a little bit of paint. You don't want this too thick, and let a little of that turquoise come in. So see how it's still got that hint of turquoise, but it's very light. And now what we're gonna do, we're gonna give a snowy edge. And we're gonna start from the sides. I'll start on the left, and I'm just gonna do some little snowbanks. So don't worry about covering in all your black. You want to see your black come through. And we'll do some on this side too. So imagine the snowbanks are around the edges of your pond, about like that. And a little more on this side, couple little dabs, using a light touch, like so. And then what I'll do, I'm gonna rinse my brush. So it looks fairly light now. The snow looks light, but it's not quite light enough. So rinse your brush. And this time take just white. You do have to thin it out a little bit. Of course. So a little bit of white. So my brush actually is pretty fully loaded. And I'm just going to dab lightly as I drag my brush on top of what we just did. So see how that kind of highlights our snow, makes it even brighter white. Again, we'll do it here. I'm using a very light touch, and my brush is fully loaded. And notice how I'm not going back over and like worrying about all these little bits. I'm just letting some white layer on top of what we just did, and I'm letting that dark still peek through. And that's our snowbanks. Rinsing my brush. The last part, I'm going to take a little bit of white paint again. I'm just going to put it right here. And I'm going to thin it out a little bit. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the back end of a brush, and I'm going to touch it in my white paint, and I'm going to give little snowflakes everywhere. Snow has just started falling. Maybe up here there's stars. Maybe down here there's snowflakes. We don't know. Do some little tiny ones. They can be stars. And there you go. If you want, you could take a tiny, tiny brush, a little bit of paint, and let's go right down in the bottom corner. Oh, too much water. And do our little signature. And there you go. That is your Northern Lights painting. I hope you have fun. See you next time.